Good evening. You're listening live to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Joining me tonight on our Father's Day is RDV from the Great Midwest and Eric Breen from the Great Middle East.
Midwest.
Midwest as well. Let's go for it. In other words, two other daddies, because tonight, with being Father's Day, we have to celebrate the best Father's Day movie of all time, which until that changes is certainly Commando. A movie that marks its place, gentlemen, because it's the roadmap. It's the pinpoint where we say the 80s movies changed, and not necessarily for the better after this movie, because it introduces Stallone into a role of a lot of guns and explosions and over-the-top silliness that could only be matched by very little after it. So one day we'll talk about pre-1985 versus post-1985 as far as what we prefer in the decade, and I, gentlemen, know my answer. But I'd like to start off by saying thank you guys for showing up on this very important day. Of course, I am broadcasting from the Extreme Studios just west of Orlando, Florida, in the Pine Hills Palace. Commando, we have to bring something new to it because this is about our 5th year in a row doing this. We've done a live stream. We've talked about stuff.
You say that, but there's only one previous from 2022 that's available for public viewing.
Well, that being said, besides routine maintenance, I wanted to bring up some topics. Do we want to talk about the role of being a positive human being that he does? Do we want to talk about the relationship, the homoerotic overtones, undertones, whatever tones you like to call it, between Bennett and John? Or do we want to talk about something that I've yet to identify? And you know what? Since we have Eric Breen, Mr. Easy E, as a guest with us tonight, RDV, I'd like to go to him first and say, let's start off by saying what you'd like to talk about, and let's steer the conversation that way.
Well, I am good with whatever the two of you come up with. I am a guest in your home. And since I do agree that this is the GOAT of Father's Day movies, and honestly, it's my favorite. I won't say it's the best movie I've ever seen. It's not in my top 10, but it is the movie that if I run across it, I stay till the end. I've probably seen this more than any movie I've ever watched. And to me, it's for what it is, it's perfect. So whatever road you want to go down, I'm good.
Some might argue that this is the best movie that Schwarzenegger's ever done.
I don't know one person that would say that, but I'm listening to your argument.
I just said that. As far as movies go, like I said, it is Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. You could say Terminator, but Terminator, he didn't do much talking either. But there's also Conan the Barbarian, but this was like where he finally gets a huge speaking role, where he allowed to do some jokes and stuff. And this is where the funny Stallone, or not funny, but funny Schwarzenegger starts. Is this where it originated? Is Commando? He does some lines, like in True Lies or Kindergarten Cop later on and stuff. But or Eraser, this was where they let him just be like, you know what, your voice sounds funny. We're just gonna go with it, and people loved it. Him just being an unstoppable, just one man wrecking crew is awesome. You had not only that, you had Radon Cho in here playing the beautiful girl that's basically like, did not know this was going to be her Friday night or whatever this takes place, what day and night. But like having to go after bad guys, and she's just like, my car is her. And at the end, I like to say that at the end of this movie that they actually become a couple, or at least become really good friends, And it's one of the best movies of Alyssa Milano that I can actually say that, you know what, she wasn't annoying.
Wow, a lot to take in there. I won't disagree with some of the stuff that you've talked about, because here on the Extreme Movie Show, we've definitely covered a lot of 80s movies. We like to say we're 80s based, even though we do different decades and different types. But the thing I always thought was pretty interesting about Arnold was that he took his ability as an actor, no matter how good or how bad it is, whatever you want to judge him at, he took himself trying to do a good job seriously. And that doesn't mean he's going to be playing Shakespeare anytime soon, but the point is he's been successful in a lot of areas of life, and his background is similar to Stallone's in that regard, is that they said, you know what, this is what I present to the audience. I want them to have a good time. And I think you nailed something that's really important, and I think it's one of the reasons why this does stick out among a lot of his 80s films. Even though Terminator's cool and it's great, it's a little bit bleak. This one is fun because you could pick any of the guys here, the good guys, bad guys. It's simple storytelling. There's skeevy guys. There's a mall. There's a hot chick in it. There's dumb action, but it's very quotable, and you're having fun watching it. You almost feel like, you're in on the joke. And I think Arnold's ability to kind of laugh at himself and say, I might be this big muscle-bound guy doing kind of goofy lines and stuff, but him delivering it seriously, that I'll be back, as he does in here famously. This is, not the first time he's done it, of course, but you're starting, to your point, see that this is the launching pad where he can go in a lot of different directions. And wisely, he got out of doing a lot of the hardcore kind of action stuff that he only been in a little bit with Conan, to doing more of these kinds of action movies. So some people will say two things about the 80s. They'll say you were in a Stallone camp or you're in a Schwarzenegger camp. And if you like one, you maybe couldn't like the other, which is nonsense. But I think Stallone really epitomized characters and story, whether you like them or not, versus Arnold going, I'm just going to blow shit up and do the American thing with it and let people like me that way, aka Predator. Not that that's not a good movie, but definitely was a thing a little bit in the 80s. And Eric, I wonder if you noticed that back then at the time.
If I did, I mean, if I noticed, I didn't pay attention. I just know that when I think about this now, 39 years later,
I know, right?
I know, right?
Get your tickets early for the 40th anniversary, and sixth one of these
will
be doing.
I'll be 40 with the 40th anniversary.
But, that's right. Yeah, something great happened in 1985,
Yes.
and you were born. We don't give it a second thought now, because there are literally dozens, if not close to 100, maybe even more. But this was the first time you kind of felt like you were watching a comic book come to life.
Yeah,
because the dialogue was very comic booky, the action was comic booky, and it was just fun. And,
now, you threw the comic book guys on here. I never thought of this angle here. So come on, let's dive into that a little bit.
I mean, they play to his strength. This is a huge guy. So he's going against two other guys, Billy Dukes, who's another big guy. They had that fight scene in the hotel, and they go through, they go into the wall, and and then you get the couple where they're having sex, and so they give you kind of the 80s cheese with the girl with the big breasts and stuff. But I mean, the one-liners. There's another scene in the mall where they're like, come on, guys, let's go take him down. And they're like, oh, shit, this guy is it's like Andre the Giant coming at you. You're back up.
Delivery is what nails it, because the guy's macking on these chicks. And he's like, he says two things. He's like, hey, y'all want to see me kick some ass? And they're like, ooh. And then he's calling it in, like you're saying. And he's like, guys, we got to he is one gigantic motherfucker. And it's just funny the way they're doing it. They're all having fun with their delivery.
Sully, I love, real quickly, and I'll let you go, Eric. I just want to say, there's a scene with Sully which I love the most, and everything's where he's gonna drop Sully at the end, like I lied. No, I love where Sully's in the phone booth and he just picks it up, rips it off the wall, the unit, and just holy crap! And like I said, this is when I think of wrestling, they overtalk with the big guys, Monster of All Men, Braun Strowman, they lift the car and stuff. It originated here for me with this, with the Arnold,
Yeah, and if you've ever read a Spider-Man comic, when he would come in, when he'd swinging on his webs into the fight, he'd be making quips, or we did one of our readings last week. Captain America and Submariner are talking to each other. Yeah, one of them's in a plane. You just have to suspend the disbelief that they can hear each other. And it's the same thing with this. So I said they're talking during fights, and like I said, it just has so many comic book elements to it that it got to the point in this movie where I wouldn't have been surprised if he'd started flying.
Well, one of the things too, when I think of over-the-top action, which I kind of don't like, although I certainly respect it and appreciate it, especially depending on how it's done, is if I'm going to go back and segue here a little bit to the 1970s and talk about comedy for a minute, because we all talk about Blazing Saddles couldn't be made today, right? But we talk about, say, Gene Wilder's, to me, his best movie, Young Frankenstein, how it's funny and everybody was in on, everybody was trying to be funny. There's different kinds of humor. There's exaggeration. There's a couple different things that, we're not going to do a deep dive on it. But the exaggeration thing is pretty neat. So I always think of the Carson skit because it was one of the first times I went, what the hell is this guy doing? And it was funny, but I didn't know why. And that was an Andy Kaufman bit where he made like, hey, I'm going to be the host. And I've mentioned this before once or twice, where his desk is like 10 feet in the air and his host or his whoever he's interviewing in there is like, a foot or two off the ground, where it's exaggerating the height that people have for importance. And the thing whenever I watch an Arnold film, to your point, RDV, is that comic bookish or not, I don't want to see necessarily blood. I don't necessarily want to see guts. I don't necessarily want to see that kind of violence, which I do like it, actually. I like graphic violence. But this is the kind of movie that doesn't need it. So when you have a spectacle like them showing off his body, which is tremendous at the beginning, that's great. And then all the different stupid stuff like him, is he really going to take this car that's got its tire slashed and just push it down the side of the mountain? He's going to drive it and hit him. That's unbelievable. But I want to see that. It does seem like a comic book. When he picks the phone book, the phone station up and throws it, you go, I know that's not really happening, but I like that. You're right. Whether he'd fly or not, I don't know. I want to see him jump out of a plane and land in a swamp to start it off with that. That's cool. It is very action oriented that way. I like it. You feel like you're on an adventure.
Yeah, I mean, we were bringing up Terminator when Kyle Reese is going into the department store and he's grabbing the sneaker as part of placement, or he's getting the guns. Arnold, he's like, I need to go shopping. Goes into the army surplus store, gets everything, and you see that freaking missile launcher. He's going for that.
Absolutely.
And he waits for it at last. He's like, then he grabs it. But then the great thing is he's going to use it, but we have Chong with him. What does she do? She uses it. She uses one of the missiles, and she doesn't know what she's doing, and she blows off the back of the squad car, allowing him to get out of the paddy wagon. I thought it was really cool. I was like, because normally, if it would have just been him by himself, you wouldn't have had her, and she would have done that just by chance and got him out of there. But yeah, everything in this movie is just over the top, but it's fun though. And you're going in like, well, this realistically, you're like, oh, this wouldn't work, and all. It's like, who cares? It's just a movie where at the time they made it because people wanted to have fun. No one was saying, well, this sucks. Don't go see this movie. This sucks. Today is really anti everything. Right. The people making it and the people who are offended by it are just like,
it's a hate relationship.
Yeah, it is. And the 80s was
all about
love, have fun. Let's make movies, let's make money, let's snort cocaine, let's hang out with ladies, let's go down and watch Miami Vice. It was great.
I've said, I'm on record, the 80s were the last truly great decade.
Yeah, and it's no secret. I think the comic book angle, to me, not being the comic book aficionado that you two gentlemen are, you hear on the Extreme Movie Show and the other channels that we populate, I think that's an interesting take, because when I think of writing in a film, to me, film is a visual spectacle, so the writing's not necessarily 100% important. If the story is great and it's written well, but you don't like the characters, I think that's a flaw. Recently, I saw a movie that I'll at some point bitch about called Civil War by Alex Garland, who I happen to have liked, borderline loved his other movies, and this one is straight trash, bros, I like to say. And there's no rooting for anybody. It's crap, and I know it's supposed to be ambiguous enough where you pick your own thing out of it, but it was not that smart of a movie. I thought it was just pretty dumb, actually. And something can be dumb and that it doesn't have to have a message or say something, like a movie like Commando. It's not obviously exploring anything, even though people talk about the homoerotic relationship between Bennett and John.
I don't. You bring it up every single time.
I do, because it's hysterical. And as a kid watching it, I never thought that. I just thought the big oaf was a freak, even though he's a big bastard, and it was dumb and goofy. But it's something you can talk about, right? Like they're having fun, and they've talked about it before, where it was kind of unintentional, but they played into it. And I think their whole attitude of just having fun at the movie reminds me of a comic book where you can't sit there and have a lot of expository, right? It's very simplistic writing. It's meant to just say one or two things here. So when I said before about the lines being very quotable, you're reading a script and you say, okay, the soldier says, slitting a little girl's throat is like cutting warm butter. And then Bennett says, put the knife away and shut your mouth. You're like, okay, how am I going to sell that? This is really stupid writing. And then the soldier has a really, really bad accent. And then Bennett says, put the knife away and shut your mouth. And he has an accent. And you're like, this is fucking awesome. Because they're really selling it to you and all that. He whispers all the time. He gets hysterical. It's great. Yeah, everything between these two. the lines are just, they're set up as a bunch of little tiny scenes, and I can see where it's kind of like that in a comic book where, okay, we get to hear at the end of the page, turn, bam, now we're into this next part too. But it's all the silly shit there too. It's like,
For the very opening for this movie,
yeah,
the garbage truck scene. And then like you get Billy Duke, and then you got another guy, and they're just going, and the guy's like, he's gonna take his trash out, and then they whip out Uzis, just kill him, and then they jump back in the throw back in there, and they leave, drive away.
That scene you just mentioned. I was afraid you were going to miss me. Don't worry, we won't. And then everything is a setup for the punchline. And I said, I've seen thousands of movies. We've all seen thousands of movies. I can't think of any single movie that I have more fun watching than this.
Stephen E. De Souza is the guy who wrote the screenplays. He also wrote before this for Walter Hill's 48 Hours.
Yeah, exactly.
That's also one of my. If I see it, so that makes sense. Same music.
Everything after this, he wrote The Running Man, Die Hard, and Hudson Hawk and Judge Dredd.
Okay, it didn't.
He didn't sustain it. No. I also, even though Hudson Hawk wasn't considered a big hit, we still love it because it's one of those movies. It's like it's so bad, but
people liked it.
Yeah.
I don't care. I don't care what the critics say.
How was I driving? 1-800. There's scenes in there that are funny. It's the same kind of humor, but you could say the Hudson Hawk just didn't fly like this movie did. But you're all right. The one-liners in this very is comic book with the quips and all, and the action. You got guys who are just unbelievably strong. You got the betrayal. People and Bennett, used to be his friend, but now he's like 006 from GoldenEye. It's like it is just like over the top, just fun.
Let me ask you guys a question. Do you think that Bennett would have actually killed his kid? Because I don't think he would have.
Not really. It's his only way to get him in there. Because if he kills the kid, he knows he has nothing to.
Well, I mean, at any point, I think if Matrix could call his bluff, I think he would, because I think it was more about the mano a mano, and I think, and I think he still had enough honor to not, he had less enough honor to involve the kids, but I think he had enough honor that we wouldn't have gone through with it.
Had this been not a lighthearted comedy and more of like a dark action, a darker one, then he probably would have killed the kid. Or at least went to try to kill the kid and be stopped by somebody else.
But it wouldn't have fit this movie, because I said this was there are rules in comic books, and one of them used to be that way in TV until the M Squad when they killed little Jimmy in front of his father. But that's a tale for another time. I think the kid would have been okay.
Used to be safe to watch Gladiator movies when you were a kid.
Well, part of the whole thing with delivery is, some people say it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Yeah.
Obviously, with writing, you're trying to put things in, and so if anybody's been listening to our pretty successful season 1 review of Columbo episode by episode guide, which will return next week as we rank all the episodes and the movies of season 1. One of the things that becomes very apparent in RDV, you and I have talked about this endlessly with other shows and movies, there's a certain template for it, right? We know what we're going to get in a Jackie Chan movie. We just talked about Michelle Yeoh and what we're probably going to see in hers. So I think here, this is a great template for what action movies can become, because you do have to evolve. And there was a lot of vigilante movies that started turning into other things like martial arts, and then this. And it's a pretty interesting window, because it's hard to recognize the fact that for Arnold, to your point, RDV, and again, it's not really a big deal, but he hadn't done a lot of talking in movies. And who cares about his accent and everything else?
No.
So you have to have him do that successfully, which he did. But everybody around him, he's got to have good chemistry with. And I think his weakest chemistry with anybody in this movie actually is the woman, but it's not that it's bad. It's just she's just there, so he has got somebody to say stuff to, which is fine.
I think they were afraid to have him speak in the other 2 movies before this, because his accent, it sounds funny. It's not, it's not your sexy accent the Americans have. It was more like they consider like, I'm Arnold Schwarzenegger, like they were kind of afraid. So This they knew was going to be a comedy. Well, frick, let him speak, man. And like, and then that just got him like roles like I said, Kindergarten Cop, True Lies, him with Phil Hartman. No, that's not Phil Hartman. What's the other guy's name? That was in there. Was it Phil Hartman? It was a guy who dated Roseanne, who was married to Roseanne for a while.
John Goodman.
Arnold.
Tom Arnold.
Yes, Arnold.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you had
John
him doing
Goodman,
this. I know, right?
TV show or whatever.
No,
yeah,
but it's interesting because he did this, and he does The Running Man a couple years later, and The Running Man is a little more serious. And then you get the Predator. Predator has some of this in here, camaraderie, but the jokes aren't as much as they are in this over the top. This imagine you place the bad guy at the end here with I think it's Vernon or something with
Vernon Wells,
man. If you replace him with Jesse Ventura, that would have been a much different movie, I think. Do you think Jesse Ventura would have been more creepy, or do you think he would have been more like a joke?
I don't like to think about that because I think that Vernon Wells was perfect for
I know. But
particular role. And I think, to be fair, if you were going to program a sophisticated, futuristic android killing machine, you probably wouldn't program him with broken English. So it's probably a good thing that he didn't speak much in that. But John Matrix can talk like anybody he wants. So it's wind him up and let him go. And I said, this movie is so much better for the amount of dialogue Schwarzenegger has in it.
Yeah.
Because he's naturally funny for as big as he is and as intimidating as he is. I said it's just fun. It's just as part of the fun of this movie.
It's something that because I've always joked about Vernon Wells because as a kid in Mad Max and one or two other things, the dude was terrifying to me. He just got the crazy thing. He's really good at. So in here, he has to deliver everything like he's going to kill you in a split second. And he's so pissed off at you, he's almost whispering. And if you notice, except for when he goes ballistic at the end, a lot of his stuff is just very serious. Like, John, when I found out it'd be $100,000, I said I'd do it for free. You're like, it's hard to keep a straight face in doing it. So I'm picturing how hard he had to work doing it. But he's a good actor. And I know everyone talks about his middle-aged dad bod, and I guess he's a DILF here on Father's Day, right? But the chainmail vest was just a bullshit, hand-knitted yarn thing or whatever like that. But he's a big dude, and just his presence alone does that. And I like, yeah, I know it's a goof, and everyone always makes fun of it. And they piled on me on a couple of the streams we had on this movie. But I'll tell you, you don't have a lot of physically big guys like that in movies today, or you do. You have a pretty guy that puts on 20 pounds, but he's not a tough guy. He just looks like he put on 20 pounds, rather than somebody that looks like he's an authentic badass. And so I think just having those two, knowing they're going to face off at the end, when you see this at the beginning, and of course kidnapping the girl, I'll go back to answer your question, Eric. I kind of agree. I don't think he'd kill the girl. It was all about them having a battle at the end, and that's really it. Everything else, I mean, does anybody remember the dictator's name in Kerplakistan or whatever little area off of, was it Catalina? I know it's not Catalina, but I mean, right off the coast. Nobody cares. I mean, they just don't. So he's blowing everybody up and like, yeah, get through all the explosions and all that till we get to the battle. Because honestly, once he starts gearing up, when he gets to the island and goes to the big fight, that's where everyone's like, oh my God, this thing's over the top. To my point, I just basically, my brain's checked out until he has the big fight there with Bennett at the end, because it's going to happen. So a classic case of the 80s saying, you know what? We're going to make somebody supposedly as intimidating or as imposing as Arnold, the bad guy. We're going to show you who it is. And then at the end, we're going to give it to you, and the good guy's going to win. And goddamn, it's so simple and stupid easy. But again, it's really not done today. People talk about what they want to do for plot convenience or writing convenience because they can't fucking write, or they put some message bullshit in it, rather than saying, what would the character do? And then one thing you can definitely say here in this movie, the characters do what they're supposed to do. I mean, it's not a big morally heavy movie where like that. No, I don't think he'd kill her. But the bottom line is he had to have that fight, so much so that you believe it when he's like, where he's like trying to goat him in, and he's like, come on, stick the knife in me. You don't need it. Just one-on-one. Leave the girl, and all that stuff. He's like, John, I don't need it. And he's just getting really stupid looking at his face. You're laughing your ass off because you're like, that's what I want to see. Two goons going over it in a really horribly slowed down fight. But it's what we want, and we get it. So
see, now,
check, please.
he didn't. Bennett really didn't do anything truly evil, but at the end, Van Helsing put the stake through his heart, literally. So it was like
Right.
he killed the vampire at the end of the movie. But
Yeah, let's talk about the Father's Day part to him. What do we think of him being paired with a young woman there at the beginning and going through all that establishing shots? I go apeshit watch that because I marked for the house. I think it's an awesome cabin, or
They're
man
fishing to do
cave, whatever.
martial arts. And all
Yeah,
this stuff.
I mean, that's your training montage, right? We get it early
Yeah.
on.
The deer feeding the deer out of the hand and stuff. It's just like, and then
The old
they don't show you
on the nose with ice cream. Oh, it always works.
they don't show you that Arnold just killed the deer with bare hands and it was cooking up like venison for his daughter later on.
we don't need to see that.
You don't need to see
Family,
it.
family beginning.
Family beginning though. Dude, had a nice setup. Everything. We have the army sends these basic general shows up. Basically it's like it's you can't help it compared to Rambo. Here comes the colonel. It's like it's like
No, nobody beats them.
I know, but he comes, shows up, and he's like,
Scotland,
your fellow guys are being killed off. He's like, okay, I need to come in. He's like, I'm busy. It's like, I'm with my daughter, I'm retired. And then he's like, well, I'm gonna leave 2 guards here that are they'll help you, the 2 soldiers, and they are like, it's just funny. Like we talk about how there are some people are just throwaway characters. Those guys, I felt so bad for those guys. Is like, he knew right away. It's like, well, don't worry, we're safe here. I'm like, dude, Arnold doesn't need them, so they are expendable. They're gone, and they are.
Might as well have been wearing red shirts.
I know, right?
I think the opening it was to show that he is a completely different man now, totally domesticated and devoted to his daughter, just wants the simple life away from everything.
Yeah.
But just underneath the surface is that killing machine that is John Matrix, and all it took was the trigger to activate him again, and then it's like you have no idea what you've just unleashed, and then we get that for the next 80 minutes.
Yeah, I think one of the things I definitely want to bring up about this movie, because I think it's an interesting idea that we haven't really talked too much about, but like when I mentioned before about comedy in the 70s and I talked about Young Frankenstein, I think that's one of the smartest and funniest comedies of all time. I know Blazing Saddles is up there for some people, and there's some others too, so everyone's got their type and taste. And I think it still holds up. I think that when you take a look at a movie like this, a part of me goes, well, I enjoyed it since it came out. It's not one I spent a lot of time thinking about. It's fun. Yeah. It's enjoyable. And I know that we say jokingly that we're going to review Commando every year on Father's Day because it's goofy and it's kind of fun. But you ever notice how some things later on take on a life of their own? Because I'll be honest with you, RDV, and maybe Eric's experience is different, even though personally it's a favorite of his. This was a movie that came out, and it was an action movie. There was nothing about it out of the ordinary that would make you think back then, coming up to now, that it's still this pretty damn good. It was just another 80s action film that had Arnold in it. It wasn't The Terminator by any means. And it certainly wasn't Raw Deal, which wasn't that big, but a Walter Hill film. So I don't know, but it's interesting to me because I just go, man, you and I have just get through talking about doing a bunch of martial arts movies over the past month or so, different types and different places and everything too. And we've always said, God, if only America would put this in there, because their action movies are going to shit.
Yep.
We had no idea this would be the type of movie that movies that started getting dumbed down in America with action and all that too.
This is a perfect example. If you know your audience and you actually, do stuff that you know your audience is going to love, you want to make money, cater to the people who's going to buy this product, who you're catering to. They obviously were catering. They found out who their audience was, and they catered to it, and they kept it going. And it just shows that today they don't really understand. Even the 90s. 90s was kind of like, let's get away from the pro-America. Let's go into the anti, government and all that stuff.
Yep.
And there was, not to say that there wasn't any anti-government before that. He had Missing in Action. It was kind of like that. You also had Rambo, where he was kind of like, they left us to die in Vietnam. It's like, But this was basically like they didn't need to be like, I'm not anti-American, I'm not pro-American, I'm just a guy who wants my daughter to be safe. We don't get a backstory about how he's a widow or how his wife died of cancer. Didn't need it. All we need to know is like you take his daughter, and you're lucky if you get Leslie Nielsen, because at least you give a chance to survive. Rambo, he's killing everybody. People are losing limbs. He's just got endless grenades, missile launchers. At the end, the whole over the top end scene. When she flies the boat. He gets on the raft. You see him. He's in the Speedo, showing off his muscles. Look, as he's a Mr. Olympia. And then he starts putting. There's a scene where he starts putting on the gear, and they frame by frame, and then he goes like as the
He's looking good
front.
here. He's
It is
looking nice and tan. He's looking juicy. He's looking good.
That scene right there, UHF had to parody that because it was so freaking awesome over the top. Shit was like, okay, but I was not prepared that he was going to have endless ammo, like infinite ammo code, and just start killing people. Yeah. It was great though. Pyrotechnics. I love that.
And remember, Spider-Man only runs out of webbing as a plot device.
See, exactly.
So that's
same with Punisher.
No, I think when they made this coming off of Terminator, I think they realized that we've got something here. Now let's see if he can do more than just walk around and look menacing. Found out that he could, and that opened the floodgates for 7, 8, 9 more Schwarzenegger action movies.
You bring up an interesting point there, because like the movie we reviewed at 6:30 Eastern tonight would be Super Cop 2 with Michelle Yeoh kind of going out on her own as hey, we got something here with the previous movie with Jackie Chan. Let's see what she can do. And I think I'll speak for RDV when I say this, that we both agreed that despite Jackie Chan's lack of absence or absence in the movie, his lack of presence, she definitely delivered on it. And it's kind of interesting how we have two movies that seem very dissimilar, have an interesting premise to them. You've got two people roughly, around the same time. Of course, this Michelle Yeoh's movie was a few years later, but at this point in their careers where, I think we got something. We don't have to make it perfect. We just have to make it good. Nothing completely stupid. Let's get all this in there. Let's have some fun with it. Let's let the audience have fun with it. Let's make a safe but effective dish rather than a artsy-fartsy one, right? And I agree. I think that's interesting, because when you've got the golden goose like Arnold, you milk it. You don't bleed it dry every single time. You go, What can we do now? You do this. He gets involved in other things, because he always steered his career in a way that he thought would work. And maybe you could argue it did or it didn't. He worked with a lot of different directors, got involved in some big things. I've always appreciated about how he chose to do that. Now, everybody else in here, I think, had a good time with it. I think they did not take away from Arnold. We've talked about how you can be too good or you can be a scene stealer, which is not a good thing. This is Arnold's movie through and through. He delivers in it. And again, the 80s thing, you go see something like this in the summer or the fall or whenever it came out, you come away and you've just been entertained for an hour and a half, nothing too deep about it. Some people would complain at the time in the 80s that action movies were dumb, they were stupid, because they didn't necessarily have a point. So there was this Vietnam thing with Rambo, like in the late 70s, early 80s, talking about this and that. And you know what? That might be true, and it might make for an entertaining, mentally stimulating movie like a Rambo. But at the end of the fucking day, for the most part, what we want is the guy to kick ass because we want to think of him as a hero. And that's what the serious people always got wrong about vigilante movies in the 70s and 80s is, yeah, we fucking get it. We don't need to be preached to. We'll make the decision ourselves. Don't talk down to us like we're stupid. And then here you get the complete opposite, because up until this film, there was not a lot of movies like Commando that just went so over the top. The only thing that I can think of, seriously, that exaggerates some of the stuff would be the short-lived Police Squad TV show and movies where the Zucker brothers just did a tremendous job with all the detective stuff. Exactly. And so much so that those movies started coming out, I think, in the late 80s. I think 88, 89 was the first one. And then you had a few others. Those were good. But that was, like you mentioned, when you have movies that are entertaining and fun, you could have other people like Weird Al or other types of ones make spoofs like this. And that became its own thing. It fed on itself.
I kind of know what you're talking about. The guy who played Shaft he did a movie where he's teaming up with a British guy, but he also had OJ the Juice in there. He had OJ Simpson was in the movie too. And I gotta say, anytime I watch a movie that has O.J. Simpson in it, I mean, after witnessing and watching TV, the police chase and all that stuff, everything that's going on, it is just so weird, surreal. Because I don't have that moment like you guys, where you watched them before the criminal chase, all that stuff.
It was a big deal, bro.
Yeah, it was a big deal. He was in the Naked Gun. He was everything. You're like, everybody's like, it's O.J. He's like, this guy's everywhere. This is great. And then it's like, all right, now we know. It's like, how do we still feel about him? But but that's beside the point. I'm just saying, it's just like, I like this because it is simple, A to B. You can watch no matter what part of the movie you're you're stuck watching the rest of it. Like Eric said, there's that many movies that I can agree with that you did. No matter what movie's on, you got to watch it to the end.
And I think one of the things about this also is this was 10 years after the last troops had come out of Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I realized there were a lot of movies that were made where you were keenly aware of where the protagonist had fought. It's obvious that this character had seen combat, but where and when wasn't important, because that we didn't need to know that. Just like we didn't need to know what happened to his wife. None of that mattered. It was just, and it would have detracted from the fun. I think this movie. Listen, I even chuckled when they blew the guy away off the garbage truck because it was such a setup. I mean, it's like when you can laugh at
mindless violence.
Yeah,
exactly.
So I said it's
yeah.
That's why I said this movie. It isn't a perfect movie, but it's the perfect movie for me.
And that is so 80s. Guys walking out with the trash can in their robe, pajama pants, walking out in the rich community stuff. Every 80s movies has one of those scenes where the guy's walking out there, bringing up to the trash can, something happens. They're always dressed like that. I don't see that much as often in movies lately. Look, the last time I saw that was Mr. Nobody.
Yeah, and the thing about it too is when I think of suburbs and middle class, we talk about the 50s, we talk about Leave It to Beaver and the post-war boom, and we talk about shows.
Commando.
Well, going into the 60s and 70s, you had a lot more family-centric type shows, whether they were on the farm or westerns and all that, family-oriented. And definitely by the 80s, you were getting away with it, but you still had stuff that was really popular in the 80s. You take a look at, again, to kind of use the O.J. Simpson example, we had another guy, Bill Cosby. He was everybody's dad in the 80s, right? I mean, I'm just saying. And everybody watched The Cosby Show, and everybody watched the Michael J. Fox Show, Family Ties. And there were other shows there too, but they were family-oriented, where everybody had kind of a role. You don't necessarily get that much these days. And I think the thing about that too is in the 80s, you definitely had this feeling of optimism. And it wasn't American, meaning the government, that gave you the opportunity. It was just, hey, in America, this is possible. I can't have a big, very expensive cabin with a very gorgeous daughter and be the greatest DILF of all time, single dad syndrome, and then go kick ass and then be home in time to feed the deer. And that was possible in the 80s. All things were possible in the 80s. If you, damn it, you just believed in yourself and worked hard at it, you too could have fun. I mean, it's so stupid.
Eric and I were talking about this earlier in the week. We're talking about this movie. It's like, it's like, I was like, oh, it's a great Father's Day. He's like, no, this is a movie you can watch any day of the week. Yep. It just happens to be about a father trying to save his daughter. I mean, you take the daughter out of that, and you could put a dog in there if you want to, like John Wick. He's like, you took my dog, I'm gonna kill you. It just like, it fits for me. It doesn't make.
Well, see, I'm not one of those weirdos that attaches greater importance to animal lives than human. I understand why people sometimes do that, but I'm sorry, it does not compute. Well, anyway.
I'll just say for John Wick, the first one made sense because his wife died of cancer, and then he didn't realize that that was the last gift she got him.
It wasn't motivation; that was an excuse.
I know, but I'm just saying. We're talking about this in our last review. Rob and I were talking about how we don't really like having all of our people are just constantly shooting, guns like this, in the movies. They like having a balance of martial arts stuff. This is a movie where that rule goes out the window. This is allowed. This is over the top. You know what you're gonna get. Just like Rambo, you want the guns. You get the shooting scenes in Rambo. It's not right. John Wick 4 felt like they're trying to be like these movies over the top with just guns, where it needed an actual story plot. This
Yeah,
one,
because they're not funny,
no,
right?
this
So
was-
they have to
yeah.
have a plot.
So and that's I agree with John Wick 4 had some cool gun scenes, but that's all it was. This has the mixture of the one-liners, except this is a very comic book movie. They leaned into basically Arnold being like, use your voice. We're gonna have you do this. We're gonna use your size. We're gonna have basically him be the oh shit. I was like, oh sorry. He's like the mall scene. I love it. He jumps and he rides on the banner or the what we call it.
Yeah.
And just I go to police store. Remember those
Yes.
crazy scenes where they're swinging on things, and he jumps and he lands on top of the elevator. I love it. The action scenes in here too. The car scenes, everything. You got the Sully doing the drug deal in like a steakhouse or whatever inside the mall.
Yeah.
It was just so crazy over the top. And malls were just came around what in the 80s, early 80s.
God, no, also been around since the 60s.
Yeah.
Have they been around the 60s?
Yeah.
Yes.
I know mine was like 77.
They were pretty much at their apex from say 75 to 85 ish.
Oh, okay.
So I mean,
okay.
I mean, they were if you were of a certain age, that's where you went to hang
Mall was
out.
everything.
Yeah, here where I am in Wisconsin, it was the late 70s when we first started getting malls around here because up in the Midwest. Right.
So down here in Central Florida, one of the first very air-conditioned malls, and a mall is not an enclosed building. A mall is just an area where things are at.
That's an
so
outlet.
you can have an open air one. Well, outlet has to do with the level of mall it is and the goods and services that they provide. So the Winter Park Mall, which is a small, intimate one, which is no longer there, got bulldozed for an outdoor mall, which is ridiculous because the old one was very high scale. And to your point about the 80s, we've talked about how in the 80s that was an oasis for everything because if you're in a big enough area, you didn't have mom and pop stores. And especially if you're in a suburb, which is new, you did not have a downtown that everybody went to. And so there was this big thing in the 80s. And, this is a thing that we'll visit at some point when we cover more stuff like this. But there's always this idea of the small towns, and Stephen King wrote about it a lot in his books. But the death of the small town to the big corporations and all that, and support this and that. When you're in middle class and you're making good, solid money, it was all about the suburbs. So the mall was where you went to go for a lot of high-end shopping, for a lot of decent shopping, for entertainment,
Christmas shopping, everything.
It was literally all in one. And the what you could get with the anchors from Sears with their catalog and how they've fallen, Macy's and how they've fallen.
By us was a mall store.
Always a drugstore. Well, we had in several of our malls here in Central Florida, we would have higher end restaurants, and near that collection of all this money, capitalism, as some people like to think about with the 80s, you would have all your follow-on stuff that would support that. So the mall was everything, and you don't see that in movies anymore. And when you get a certain amount of people like that together, there's a certain energy and juice that you just can't capture. It's like going to a concert and seeing music being played live by actual musicians, regardless of their level of quality. It's not the same thing as this auto-tune, let's run it through a monitor thing, and we're all kind of doing whatever. It's just not the same energy and juice. So it's missing from action movies today. I think you nailed it when you talked about John Wick 4 being that way in a sense.
Yeah. I was trying to think, in this movie, was there actually any product placement in this?
I'm sure in every scene.
In this scene, I'm trying to think of was there anything stand out because, I know Wayne's World they made fun of that. Well, we're only selling Pepsi, the Advil and stuff.
I don't recall any specific products being pimped out in this movie.
Because
the cars, I'm sure the mall itself, the Galleria Mall, Eric, that was in Fast Times and a bunch of other malls. That was the mall they did a lot of filming in. That was
really
absolutely. Oh yes,
yeah, but there wasn't like you guys,
Nike.
Let me take a drink of my Coke Zero while we there wasn't anything as overt as that.
No
clothing. I'm sure it was the same clothier for everybody, basically.
Because it was obviously in Terminator, over the car she's driving, or basically her, where Kyle Reese puts on the Nikes. Obviously, it was clear he's put on. He's got the Air Jordans now, whatever we call it.
Yes.
Yeah, and he's put them on. This, the only thing I think is, I was I don't think there really was anything, for product placement. I mean, do you remember? I can't remember offhand if there's any stores like
credits,
Spencer's.
that'll be a very long list. I'm sure.
No, I mean in the mall scenes. Because usually in the mall they show you they show there's Spencer's, there's Radio Shack, there's this. I don't know if I can't offhand. I mean, I don't.
Let me present this to you for a movie in 1985. product placement, while always around, and some people reason that's why you have a movie is for product placement. It wasn't as in your face as it is now, where it's almost like the opposite. So it was still relatively new because Nike, believe it or not, especially for the younger listeners here on the Extreme Movie Show, Nike was not a big company at all. Frankly, even though they attached themselves after being a running company trying to sell shoes out of the back of the guy's car, I think they were a University of Oregon guy, Phil Knight. They even had John McEnroe, who was the best tennis player at the time, and tennis was huge. It was as big as any sport at the time, except for the NFL and baseball at the time. It was massively popular then, as well as basketball. It wasn't until they got Michael Jordan in 84, 85 and latched onto him and hitched their wagon to it that they really turned around. So when they had in Back to the Future, also this year in movies, Nike was very smart, prescient, and going, you know what? We're going to make a gamble, not just on this and crossover.
I'm looking at the scene now. The Pacifica was in there, and a few others. Where he's in the food court.
Yeah, at the end of the movie, when the credits roll, they'll say special thanks to, like they'll have like locations that film. They'll say special consideration, and they'll go through all of them. Yeah,
but there wasn't anything like, let me go to the McDonald's here in the food court and get a Big Mac.
Or hey, let's put Jennifer Connelly in a Target.
Was Papa Murphy's around back then?
Yeah,
Papa John's. That's probably what I'm seeing. There's a pretzel place and there's a Papa. Looks like Papa.
You would be surprised at the brands you see and that are still around, or you go, wow, what happened to that brand?
Yeah, like I said, comic books. They actually, if they want to do something with Radio Shack or the Electric Company, they did that. Spider-Man with the Dallas Cowboys, or with Radio Shack, there was I think it was Superman. The drugs,
Mm-hmm. What Radio Shack meant at the time for such a long time was insane.
Yeah, there was the Radio Shack one where Superman went in to get something, and they were out of it.
Yeah,
that sums up late Radio Shack, though.
I mean,
expensive.
I think a Radio Shack would be like that would be the perfect place to be like a show where the guy needs to build something, goes to Radio Shack, gets all the devices, and he like MacGyver. I need this, I'm gonna build this, and then
Radio Shack did it to themselves. I mean, it'll be interesting to talk about the shows that had certain things in it, because you did have noticeable product placement then, and it became more of a thing like when Fox started airing things.
It is
in the
crazy
mid to late 80s.
You can go back to 80s, and whenever they show a mall, you can name the place, you recognize the place in here. I'm thinking about nowadays, we're gonna show a movie from the 90s or the 2000s. Is that a GameStop? What is that? Do they even do that anymore? They're even mall scenes? No. That's
no.
Yeah. So, but yeah,
this took the place of everything.
Yeah, I know, right?
All right, final thoughts on this movie, gentlemen.
Oh man, final thoughts. If you haven't seen this, or you're like, I can't stand Arnold you're anti-Arnold for whatever reason, because there are people who don't like certain characters or certain actors for some reason. Like people don't like Will Ferrell. I think he's funny. I'm sure there are people who are crazy and don't like Arnold movies. You need to get off your high horse, sit your ass down, watch this movie, and lay off some steam.
Yeah, definitely some fun with that. Eric?
I say this is the perfect popcorn movie. I said, if you watched Rambo was saying something. This is just saying, let's have fun for 90 minutes.
Yeah, I agree totally. You Titanic fans, you people interested in love stories? James Horner did the score.
You mentioned the mall name, Sherman Oaks Galleria. Yeah. It pops up when you type in Los Angeles, California.
I'm going off the top of my head here because I never have notes. That's what we do here in Extreme Movie Show.
Yeah.
We never talk backstage. We just know what we're doing. We fire it up and we talk about it, see if it's a first watch, compare it to other things we watch, and we build a conversation based off the feedback that we have from people in other movies and stuff. So it's very organic. But yeah, 3 stories, which is a bit unusual for mall, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
I've only been in one 3-story mall, and it was very small, but it was very vertical.
The only mall I can think of that has 3 stories or more is the Mall of America or Minnesota.
Yeah. And that was a big deal when it got made. It was one of the last big mega malls made.
Yeah. Wonder how long that's going to be around before they tear that down to put in an outdoor mall.
All right, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Commando, your best Father's Day movie of all time. We'll certainly talk more father-type movies as we can discover them. And a year from now, If there's not a movie to replace this, we'll review it yet again. But we always try to bring something new to it here on the Extreme Movie Show. For Eric and RDV, anything you need to pimp right now?
Just check out whether Armor of God and some of the other past. Go watch Mr. No Man Legs, guys. We have other movies on here that you guys need to watch. They're just being neglected. Mr. No Man Legs. Then you have what was the other one we did with Lady Kung Fu? Guys, we've done other movies. We're sorry for Remo Williams. We know the guys didn't like that.
It happens.
So don't neglect the other movies because we reviewed a movie you didn't like. Okay,
Mr. No Legs is up there with Impulse with William Shatner, filmed in Tampa. It's about a legitimate guy, Eric, who's a quadriplegic who has a black belt in martial arts, and he's the hitman in this movie. He's not the main star, but he's a scene stealer, and it's got this gritty 70s feel to it. It's tremendous.
And it's all created by the guy who created Flipper and the guy who was in the Creature Black Lagoon costume for all movies.
Richard Jekyll's in it, too.
Nico Browning. Yeah, it's a fun movie. Well, that being said...
Watch him choke the guy out in the pool with just his arms. Is phenomenal.
I mean,
that scene's still in my head.
Who would have thought the movie with a guy with no legs wouldn't have no legs to get off the ground? Interviews. There you go.
Good night now. Good night now.
Later, guys.
Good night, kids.